Vidar joins us as the Director of the National Committee for Research Ethics in the Social Sciences and the Humanities from Norway. He comes to us from having a background in philosophy of science and science studies, and he's going to be talking to us today around the involvement of consumers and participants in the development of guidelines. So thank you, Vidar. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you for the invitation to participate here. So I bring my greetings from Norway. It's like 3:30 in the morning, and it's a bit of snow, so it's almost winter, but it's really nice to be with you in Australia. The main topic of my talk is the guidelines that is provided by NESH, which is the National Committee for Research Ethics in the Social Sciences and the Humanities in Norway. We produce guidelines which are used as a very important means for self-governance of ethics within this field of research. And I'm going to emphasize the involvement of participants in this process of making these guidelines. Participants here can mean different things. And first of all, I want to emphasize the involvement of the researchers themselves in developing guidelines for research ethics, because this is a very important part of the Norwegian system, that research ethics and means for governance of research ethics is actually being developed by the researchers themselves. Then, of course, we had other lay people, stakeholders, users, and so forth, which I'll touch upon. And then towards the end of my talk, I'll also talk about another committee we have in Norway, which is focusing on human remains. And this committee is interesting because this is where the knowledge and competence in Norway sits in relation to the indigenous people of the north, the Sami. So I also touched upon this towards the end of my talk, and also inspired by your tradition, respectful tradition here in Australia, acknowledging also the Sami peoples as the traditional owners of the lands of the north. So I want to start by sort of outlining two main perspectives. Let's just see how this works. 1 second, please. Two perspectives which are central in my talk. The first is, of course, the international one. I'm coming from Norway to talk to you here in Australia. And I think that's a very important approach in terms of being able to compare and also communicate across national systems. We need to understand how national systems are different to be able to communicate across these different national styles. And for me, the relevant context here is the activities that has been going on for the last 10, 15 years in relation to the World Conferences on research integrity. The last one being in Cape Town, South Africa in the late May in this year. And this is one of the functions of these international conferences is simply to share knowledge, to meet and share knowledge, and to foster and exchange information and discussion about responsible conduct of research. But one of the things that we learn is that although we have the same aim and we work on the same topic, we all have different national styles because of history, culture, politics, funding, and also fundamental values. So every single country, so to speak, has their own national system. And that's why we also, in addition to this international context of the World Conferences, have a series of more regional networks. We have in Europe, we have the HREC network, which was established in 2008 in the aftermath of the first World Conference in Lisbon. Then, of course, you have the Asian Pacific Research Integrity Network, the HREC network, which was established in around 2013 at the third conference in Canada. And then we also have more recently the African network, the ARIAN network, the African Research Integrity Network, here represented by Francis Kombe of Kenya, and the the Inter-American network, here represented by Roxana Lozano from Peru. So we have all these different regional networks as well, trying to sort of foster integrity according to more regional cultural traditions and systems. But the main message is, of course, that like everything that is global, it is also local, and every sort of attempt to make sort of standardized procedures to fit all doesn't really work, because we need to take into account the more specific needs across regions and nations, but also across different research fields. And I also like this last picture of the interaction between these people, because a very important part of this international conference is actually to get together and talk. And as it was said just before I came on by Gordon, this is where I met Gordon, Dr. Gordon McGurk, and he generously invited me to this conference. This is also sort of part of the context of my talk. The other perspective is, of course, that I'm coming to this conference from the social sciences and the humanities. And I think that's another context which is important for addressing issues more of contrast and difference, and maybe also conflict. And I guess you know this all from the Australian context, but this is also part of the whole global discourse, because we see this unfolding in every single country, how to make a system that is good for all different research fields. If you want to have one point of departure in this field from the SHREC perspective, I would recommend the book on ethical imperialism by Zachary Schrag from 2010. He is an American historian, and he has basically written the history of the development of the institutional review boards since the 1960s. And he outlines how the whole idea of establishing a system for medical and health research ethics, that's sort of important and good in itself, but also how that develops and starts to feed into other fields of research like social science, psychology, and eventually humanities, and how this sort of imperialism creates tensions which are still with us today. But this is a sort of historical account of that, which is really important, I think, to sort of understand the underlying context and tensions that we build into these systems. Another point of departure is the book, The Ethics Structure from 2016, which is exploring alternatives to formal research ethics review. It's a very interesting book. And for me, it was especially valuable to read the contribution by Mark Israel and Gary Allen and Colin Thompson on the Australian research ethics governance, for me to see how the sort of national system in Australia has developed. And this leads me over to the third book that I would sort of recommend, which is also by Mark Israel, who tries to outline research ethics and integrity for the social scientists. So if you want to sort of see how ethics and ethics governance might look if it had been developed by the social scientists for them and with them, this is a very good point of departure, I think. And for me, it is especially interesting to read that also Israel points to Norway. So he looks to us to say that the Norwegian approach is unusual in building an alternative structure to support ethical decision-making outside the biomedical realm. So already here we have this sort of touching point between Australia and Norway, which we will now look more into. So if you want to understand the national research ethics system that we have in Norway, we have a set of national ethics committees, which has been established by the national parliament as early as 1990. And by that time, we did not just get a medical committee, we also got a national committee for the natural sciences and technology, and a committee for social science and humanities. So we sort of build up ethical reflection within all these three domains in parallel. It's also important to understand that the national committees are not sort of institutional like in the Australian system. This is on a national level. They are under the Ministry of Education and Research, but as an independent unit. And the members of the committees are being appointed by the Research Council. So it's like a soft governance kind of institution between research and politics. We also have a very close affiliation to the university and higher education sector, which also feeds into how the fundamental ethics of the whole system has been developed. So there's a strong sense of academic research culture, which is built into the system in the sense that we emphasize individual academic freedom, the importance of institutional autonomy, and also the fundamental sort of ethos of science, the broader ethical norms associated with science in society. And also because ethics is sort of between politics and research, we have this strong notion also about norms for balancing the relation between science and society, which it also feeds into a broader concept of the social responsibility of science. So that's sort of a different normative set, which goes beyond what is usually recognized as research ethics derived from the Belmont Report and the 1970s, focusing on respect and beneficence and justice. So we include sort of broader notions as well about science should be open, it should be collective, it should be independent, and it should be critical. So this is all fed into the fundamental normative foundation on which this system is built. And this opens up for a much broader spectrum of research ethics questions to be handled within the system. So the main function for the national committees is actually to support the academic institutions in their work in fostering ethics and integrity in research. So we're like a support structure on a national level, providing resources and guidance, and also debates and outreach activities to support the researchers and the research institutions. In that sense, it's like a more centralized system between research and politics, in the sense that I understand that your HREC system is more on the institutional level. Another important feature is that we also have built in not sort of ethical imperialism, but ethical pluralism. So when we had these committees established in 1990, we had the three original committees: NEM, which is for medical and health research; NENT, for science and technology; and NESH, which is social science and humanities. And when these committees were established in 1990, they were established on a different footing because they are different in topic, they have different relation to society, and they also have different approach to formalizing research ethics. So the medical committee, there we already had sort of international debates. So this was more about codifying and implementing regulation of ethics in relation to international debates. Within the science and technology, there wasn't much around, so they were basically mandated to make a checklist, to have a simple checklist to be used as a point of departure. And then for NESH is somewhere in between, because we had more like international professional guidelines and more debate. So the idea was that NESH should provide guidelines, which is another sort of text or document to be used by the researchers themselves. But the point is that we have these three national committees working together on different fields from the beginning. Then from 2007, we also got the fourth committee, the Research Misconduct Committee, which is more like handling cases of misconduct. And in 2008, we also got the Skeleton Committee, or the Committee on Human Remains, which I'll talk more about later. So this is basically the setup on the national level, that we have different committees working on different topics within different research fields. Then we also have a separate system for regional committees for medical and health research ethics, the REC system. But this REC system is, of course, unlike the system you have, because these are regional committees which are doing medical ethical pre-approval of all medical research projects. So we don't have like HRECs on an institutional level. We have a regional system which does much of the same function. And there are pros and cons, of course, in this debate, but this is the way we have it in Norway. The interesting part is, of course, that these medical committees have a specified mandate according to the Medical and Health Research Act. So everything that falls under the aegis of the law should be treated here. Everything that is outside should be treated according to other measures of guidance and guidelines and so forth. So we don't have that debate that this system should expand into social science or humanities or science for that sake. We have other systems for handling ethics in these other domains, and there are clear boundaries between what belongs where according to these different committees. In that way, we don't get these tensions as much between the medical system and other domains of research and research ethics, which we of course think is a strength. If you want to learn more about the Norwegian system, the best place is to go to our webpage. It's accessible also as researchethics.no if you want to have access, and this is where you find all the information that we have from the meetings, from the committees, all the activities and all the resources that we have. And it's important also now in terms of broader involvement that we do not just communicate with researchers and research institutions. We also have a broad outreach obligation to communicate ethics to the broader audience as well. So we have, for instance, a magazine called Research Ethics, Forskningsetikk, which is published 4 times a year, which establishes sort of a common frame in the public as well for questions of research ethics in a broader sense. We also make books on different topics, which can be accessed open access through our webpage. So far, the only one in English is the Internet Research Ethics book, but this is also part of the work that we do in providing resources for teaching, but also for the broader public. But the most important part of our work, and this is in the Committee of NESH, Social Science and Humanities, is the development of these guidelines, which is basically a tool for self-governance within the field of research. And it consists of, this is a short summary of the how it is composed. It has a short introduction, which outlines the fundamental norms of ethics, what we build on. So, and here it's outlined how it's not just research integrity. It's not just about treating people, the participants, okay. We also have this broader notion of science and society built into the research ethics framework. There's an attachment which tells people more about the system itself, who's doing what in the system, what are the laws and regulations relevant, and so forth. And then the main part consists of these guidelines divided into 5 main topics. And the best way to sort of describe it is that it outlines the different relations in which the researcher has a responsibility. So ethics is always relational, and this sort of outlines the different dimensions in which you have a responsibility. So first, of course, you have the obligations towards the research community, sort of to make good academic culture, teaching, supervision, sort of securing the integrity of the research. Then there's a section on research participants, which is, of course, the humans participating and respect and beneficiaries and all that. Also in part C, which outline groups and institutions, fundamentally the same norms, but on a more institutional level. But then we also have 2 parts with a much broader outlook. One on commissioners, funders, and collaborators, which outlines how to handle tensions in research when other people are being invited in. When ethics is being put under pressure, how do we handle that, both as institutions and individual researchers? And this is where we sort of handle some of the broader questions of, for instance, conflict of interest or pressure and so forth. And then there's a section on dissemination of research as well, which has to do with the responsibilities towards science at large. Now, when we come to the sort of involving of the research communities, this is a very important aspect of the production of these guidelines, because they're not produced by the bureaucracy or by the politics. It's produced by researchers in collaboration with researchers to aid researchers in practice. So there's a strong sense of ownership in the sense that these guidelines are made by the researchers themselves, helped by the work of the committee, which somehow represents the scientific community. So when NASH was established in 1990, the first thing they did was to establish these guidelines, published for the first time in 1993. And then, of course, it has to be a living document because ethics evolves with society and new cases and criticism and so forth. So it has been revised numerous times in 1999, 2006, 2021, and most recently in 2021. So the point is that the guidelines are a codification of the research community's own values and norms, the sort of ethics in research, seeking to ensure academic freedom, responsibility, integrity, and trust in research. And the way this is done in practice is that the committee sort of makes a new draft, it's sent on a public consultation. And in this last process, we received more than 60 inputs from institutions and researchers and other actors. And then the committee basically goes through all the comments and drafts and make a new revision, which is then published and shared with the research community. In this way, the work done by the committee is being regarded as sort of legitimate on behalf of the research community. And they also have a strong sense of ownership in the sense that this belongs to them. It is also very important that because ethics also covers academic freedom, independence, and core academic values, it is being used as a tool for this as well in the research community. And all these committees, of course, have lay representation, and this is part of the whole structure, much similar to the system you have. Then we also have a National Committee for Research Ethics on Human Remains, which is called the Skeleton Committee. And this is a very different committee. It was established in 2008 in response to questions regarding research on human remains from Norway's indigenous group, the Sami, and questions that had to do with repatriation and reburial of human remains from national collections. So that was the point of departure when this committee was set up in 2008. So it functions as a national resource to promote responsible and ethically sound research on human remains and provide guidelines and advice, much like the other committees. And this committee worked with a lot of different cases in relation to human remains. So first of all, giving the context of the Sami and the collections of Sami material and the human remains, a lot of the focus has been on repatriation and reburial. And there's a huge collection of cases where the committee has been involved in dialogue and involvement of different Sami peoples to develop a sort of an ethical framework for how to handle this. There are also more international cases from Norway. One famous linked to the Rapa Nui, which is very big in Norway because it has to do with the big sort of Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, who in the 1950s sailed through the Pacific on a fleet and visited the Eastern Island. And of course, he took a lot of cultural resources, material, and also human remains back to Norway. And this has been quite an knowledge in Norway until quite recently. And now medical doctors want to do like DNA tests on this material. And there's been a huge debate on how that should be done and to what extent it is necessary to involve community and peoples of Rapa Nui in this process. And in this context, the National Committee also have competence and contacts to facilitate these kind of processes. A lot of the other cases has to do with sampling because these are really rare material and there's a huge interest in sort of doing testing and sampling either with ancient DNA or isotope analysis. So there's a lot of sort of data harvesting here going on, which makes it necessary to protect the material from destruction. And there's a lot of cases going on in exhibitions on how to do that properly and respectful. And based on all these cases, this committee also developed guidelines for ethical research on human remains. And you can see the product here and the different dimensions and questions that are being addressed in this document as well. And this is where you can see also the difference from the kind of approach that you have in Australia with the ethical conduct research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities, which has a different point of departure, focusing on the peoples and the involvement of people in research, much in line with the broader framework of the statement and the code. And also the development of 6 fundamental core values, which are in line with these norms and values are very inspiring for us in Norway because we haven't gotten this far, so to speak. Our committee started off on a different footing, focusing on human remains in collections, not so much in medical research, but more towards archaeology, epidemiology, genetics, and so forth. But if you want to look to Norway for the sort of kind of similar document, we have a rather new resource now produced by the Sametinget, which is the Sametinget, the political parliament of the Sami people. They have just recently provided ethical guidance for Sami health research. And it's quite interesting for me. This is just a 2-page document that they also seem to have this kind of approach to the fundamental norms, which should be relevant here, which I guess is more probably just inspired by what you have already done in Australia. So again, there are connections with how we work, although we are different, we are onto some of the same things. So if I should try to sort of sum up how I see the comparison between Norway and Australia, I would do this in like three quick texts. So if you start to focus on the statement, which you have, it's an incredible document, very detailed. It makes a really good approach for how to do this kind of ethical evaluation. It differs from us in the sense that we have 3 separate committees doing ethical guidance in different ways. So we don't have the extension of one system into the other. We have different systems for all. The other big difference is, of course, that you have institutional committees while we have a strong centralized national system. And there are pros and cons with both, but I should wish that we had more focus on the institutional level, much like the system that you have. So this is very inspiring. The second document, the code is also very impressive. Again, there are similarities and differences in the sense that we also need to handle misconduct like you do, but we do this in Norway by law. So we have a law that addresses this, which also makes it more a case for lawyers than for self-regulation and responsibility within the community. So again, I think this is a very important and inspiring document. Also, the one I mentioned on the guidelines, very impressive work, even more than supplemented by the companion document. I think this is a huge inspiration for other countries to see what you have done in this field of ethics. And as I showed, we are already inspired by it. So if there's one thing that we have to possibly add, it would be something like research ethics guidelines for social sciences and humanities. This is something that it would be interesting for you to look into. I don't know who could do it or what it would look like, but if you're interested in going that way, we would be more than happy to continue this dialogue and contribute if that's interesting. So thank you much for the attention, and thank you.